The silk curtains of Topkapi Palace flutter in the evening breeze. Behind them, the most powerful man on earth faces an impossible choice. Suleiman the Magnificent commands armies that stretch from Vienna to Baghdad. His word is law across 3 continents. Yet tonight he trembles before 2 women. Mahidevran Sultan, mother of his firstborn son. Hurrem Sultan, the slave girl who captured his heart. One whispers poison in his ear, the other weaves plans in the shadows. Between them lies Prince Mustafa, golden heir to an empire, beloved by the people, destined for greatness. But only one woman's son can inherit the throne. The Sultan's choice will drench the palace in blood. It will reshape the Ottoman Empire. It will echo through centuries. Love, jealousy, murder. The deadliest triangle in history begins now. In the rose gardens of Topkapi, where petals fell like tears upon marble paths, fate wore the face of a slave girl from the distant steppes of Ukraine. Her name was Alexandra Lisovska. The morning light caught the copper in her hair as she walked among the flowering bushes, her chains invisible yet absolute. The Sultan Suleiman found her there. He had come seeking solitude among the thorns and blooms, his mind heavy with the weight of empire. Instead, he discovered something rarer than gold, more precious than the jewels that adorned his turban. She looked up from the roses she tended. Their eyes met across the garden's width. Time paused. Her beauty struck him first, as beauty often does with men of power. The high cheekbones that spoke of her Slavic heritage, the green eyes that held depths no slave should possess. But beauty fades with morning dew. What captured the Sultan's soul was her voice. She spoke Turkish with the careful precision of one who had learned it through necessity. Her words carried wit sharpened by survival, intelligence honed by loss. When she smiled, the garden seemed to brighten. When she laughed, the very walls of the seraglio trembled with the sound of something new being born. The other women watched from latticed windows. Mahidevran Sultan, mother of Prince Mustafa, felt the earth shift beneath her feet. She had ruled the harem with the quiet authority of one who had given the Sultan his first son and heir. Her position seemed unshakable, built upon the foundation of royal blood flowing in her child's veins. But foundations can crumble. The Ukrainian girl was given a new name, as all who entered the Sultan's favor were renamed. Hurrem, they called her, the joyful one. The choice seemed cruel to those who understood the language of palace politics. Joy had no place in the calculated world of succession and survival. Yet joy she brought. Suleiman found himself drawn to her chambers with increasing frequency. She offered him what no other could: conversation without flattery, laughter without pretense, counsel without agenda. Or so it seemed to the man who held the fate of millions in his hands. The established order began its slow dissolution. Mahidevran Sultan watched her carefully constructed world fracture along lines she had never seen coming. The slave girl's influence grew like ivy, creeping into places where no concubine had dared venture before. The Sultan consulted her on matters of state. He sought her opinion on poetry and philosophy. Most dangerously of all, he began to love her. Love in the Ottoman court was not the gentle emotion celebrated by poets. It was a weapon that could topple dynasties, a force that could elevate slaves and destroy princes. Hurrem wielded it with the instinctive skill of one who had learned that survival depended upon understanding the hearts of men. In the rose gardens of Topkapi, where she had first caught the Sultan's eye, Alexandra Lisovska died her final death. Hurrem Sultan was born. The marble floors of Topkapi grew cold beneath Mahidevran's feet. Each morning brought fresh humiliation. Each evening delivered new wounds. Hurrem's laughter echoed through corridors, once filled with her own voice. The Russian concubine moved through the palace like a conquering empress. Her belly swelled again and again. Sons emerged from her womb with startling regularity. Mehmed first, then Selim. Abdullah followed, though death claimed him early. Finally Bayezid arrived, and with him the crushing weight of mathematics. 4 sons to Hurrem, 1 son to Mahidevran. The numbers told their own story. Servants who once bowed deeply before Mahidevran now offered perfunctory nods. Their eyes searched past her, seeking more promising patrons. The eunuchs whispered in Turkish now, abandoning the Circassian tongue they once used to curry her favor. Even the kitchen staff altered their allegiances, sending choicer cuts to Hurrem's quarters. Palace loyalty flowed like water, always seeking the lowest ground. Mahidevran watched this transformation from her diminishing realm. Her apartments, once expanded to accommodate her rising status, seemed to contract daily. Rooms that had bustled with activity fell silent. Attendants melted away like snow in spring. The harem divided itself with surgical precision. 2 courts emerged within the singular palace. Hurrem's faction grew bold, their voices carrying farther each day. They spoke of futures where Russian sons might rule Ottoman lands. They calculated succession with the confidence of those who held winning cards. Mahidevran's supporters dwindled to a precious few. Old loyalists who remembered her early triumphs. Servants whose families she had protected during harsh winters. A handful of eunuchs who feared Hurrem's eventual vengeance more than they coveted her current favor. These remnants gathered in shadowed alcoves, their conversations growing shorter and more guarded with each passing season. Mustafa remained her singular hope. Her firstborn son trained with dedication that bordered on obsession. He studied statecraft and military strategy. His tutors praised his quick mind and natural leadership. At 17, he possessed the bearing of a future sultan. Yet questions haunted the corridors. Would tradition prevail over affection? Would Suleiman honor the ancient law of succession, or would he break centuries of precedent for his beloved Hurrem? The uncertainty poisoned every interaction. Mahidevran found herself analyzing each glance, weighing every word Suleiman spoke to their son. Did his embraces last as long as before? Did his pride in Mustafa's achievements burn as brightly? Sleep abandoned her entirely. She lay awake counting threats, cataloguing enemies, measuring distances between her quarters and the Sultan's chambers. The woman who had once embodied grace and confidence now moved through her days like a caged panther, beautiful still, but dangerous in her desperation. Bitterness crystallized in her heart like salt in an abandoned well. The taste of it filled her mouth each morning. The weight of it settled deeper into her bones with each of Hurrem's victories. The mother's rage began as ember. It would grow to consume them all. The golden years arrived like dawn breaking over the Bosphorus. Prince Mustafa emerged from boyhood into manhood with the grace of a hunting falcon taking flight. His frame stretched tall and powerful. His voice deepened into the commanding tones that would one day echo through palace halls. His mind sharpened like Damascus steel under the forge of tutors and experience. Everything about him proclaimed Ottoman royalty in its finest form. The first military campaigns beckoned. Persia stretched beyond the eastern borders, its Safavid rulers challenging Ottoman dominance with renewed aggression. Suleiman chose his eldest son to lead the counter-offensive. The decision surprised no one. Mustafa had trained for this moment since childhood. He rode out from Constantinople at the head of seasoned janissaries and eager young warriors. The banners of the empire rippled in mountain winds as the army crossed into hostile territory. Victory followed victory like beads on a prayer chain. Mustafa proved himself not merely brave, but brilliant in the art of war. His strategies confounded Persian generals. His personal courage inspired Ottoman soldiers to feats of legendary valor. When he led charges against enemy positions, men followed him into certain death with songs on their lips. When he showed mercy to defeated foes, his reputation for honor spread across both empires. The victories brought more than military glory. They brought something far more dangerous: love. Common soldiers spoke his name with reverence usually reserved for the Sultan himself. Provincial governors praised his wisdom when he administered conquered territories. Merchants prospered under his protection. Farmers blessed his name when his policies brought peace to war-torn regions. Every success added another thread to the tapestry of his growing legend. Every act of justice won another heart. Every display of courage earned another supporter among the empire's most influential families. The very perfection of his accomplishments began to cast shadows. Whispers started in the palace corridors like autumn leaves rustling in hidden corners. They spoke of a prince too popular for his own good, too beloved by subjects who should love only their sultan, too independent in thought and action for an heir who must remain subordinate to his father's will. The whispers found fertile ground in minds already suspicious of growing power. They sprouted into questions that had no safe answers. Could an empire contain two sons? Could a father trust a son who commanded such devotion? Could absolute rule survive when subjects dreamed of alternatives? Mustafa remained unaware of the gathering storm. He continued his duties with the same dedication that had won him glory. He governed provinces with justice. He led armies with valor. He treated all men with the dignity that had earned their love. His very virtues became accusations against him. His popularity transformed into evidence of dangerous ambition. His success in fulfilling every expectation of an Ottoman prince paradoxically marked him as a threat to the throne he was born to inherit. The Golden Prince had grown too bright for mortal eyes to bear. The poison began as whispers. Hurrem moved through the palace corridors like evening mist, her silken robes brushing against marble floors, worn smooth by centuries of intrigue. In the Sultan's private chambers, she would pause at his shoulder as he studied maps of distant campaigns. Her fingers would trace the edges of parchment while her voice carried carefully measured words. Mustafa grows restless in Manisa, my lord. The generals speak of his impatience. The seeds were planted with surgical precision. A letter intercepted, its contents suggesting correspondence between the prince and ambitious pashas. A servant's testimony about midnight meetings that may never have occurred. Each piece of fabricated evidence arrived at the perfect moment, when Suleiman's mind was clouded with fatigue from governing an empire that stretched beyond the horizon. The Sultan had grown older in ways that surprised even himself. His beard showed silver threads that caught the light like frost on winter branches. Victory still followed his armies, but the weight of decisions pressed heavier upon his shoulders. Sleep came fitfully now, filled with dreams of crumbling fortresses and rebellious sons. Hurrem understood the architecture of doubt. She never spoke directly of treason. Instead, she painted pictures with fragments. a general's loyalty to Mustafa that seemed excessive, conversations that ended too quickly when the Sultan's name was mentioned, the way soldiers' eyes brightened when they spoke of the young prince. "Your son inspires great devotion," she would murmur, allowing the words to hang in the air like incense. The transformation occurred gradually. Suleiman began reading Mustafa's letters with different eyes. Phrases that once spoke of filial duty now carried undertones of ambition. Reports of the prince's popularity among provincial governors became sources of unease rather than pride. In council meetings, the Sultan found himself studying faces for signs of divided loyalty. Which of his viziers smiled too warmly when Mustafa's name arose? Who among his commanders had served under the prince in distant campaigns? The questions multiplied like shadows at sunset, each one breeding another. Hurrem watched her husband's metamorphosis with the patience of a master craftsman. She had learned to read the subtle shifts in his expression, the way his fingers drummed against the arm of his throne when troubling thoughts consumed him. The mighty Suleiman, who had conquered Rhodes and stood at the gates of Vienna, now started at unexpected sounds in his private quarters. The prince remained in Manisa, unaware that his father's heart was being turned against him. Mustafa continued his duties with the same dedication that had marked his service since boyhood. His letters spoke of successful tax collections, of disputes settled with wisdom, of bridges built and roads maintained. But these very accomplishments became weapons in his stepmother's hands. "He builds too much loyalty," she observed to Suleiman one evening as they walked through gardens where jasmine bloomed under starlight. The Sultan nodded slowly, his mind already racing towards darker possibilities. The son he had once held as the future of his dynasty now appeared as its greatest threat. Trust, that most fragile of bonds between father and child, began its inexorable dissolution. The palace held its breath, sensing the approaching storm. The shadows lengthened across the palace courtyards as Ibrahim Pasha walked the familiar corridors of power. 20 years had passed since the Greek boy became the Ottoman Empire's most trusted minister. 20 years of shared dreams with Suleiman. 20 years of conquest and glory. Now those same corridors whispered of poison and betrayal. Ibrahim understood the game too well. Hurrem's web grew tighter each day around Prince Mustafa. The boy carried his father's nobility, his grandfather's strength. He would make a worthy sultan. But worthiness, Ibrahim knew, was often a sentence of death in the Ottoman court. The Grand Vizier moved carefully. A word here to the janissary commanders about Mustafa's loyalty. A subtle reminder there to provincial governors of the prince's military successes. Ibrahim wielded influence like a master craftsman shapes gold, delicate touch by delicate touch. He met with foreign ambassadors in rooms heavy with incense and unspoken warnings. The Habsburg threat loomed across the Danube. Internal division would invite catastrophe. Surely Suleiman would see this truth. Surely their friendship would shield both empire and prince from Hurrem's machinations. But Ibrahim had forgotten the fundamental law of palace survival. No one stands above suspicion, not even the Sultan's dearest friend. Hurrem observed everything. Her network of servants, eunuchs, and minor wives carried tales like autumn leaves on bitter wind. The Grand Vizier protects Mustafa too zealously. The Grand Vizier speaks too boldly of succession. The Grand Vizier forgets his place. She approached Suleiman during the quiet hours before dawn prayers. Her voice carried honey and venom in equal measure. Ibrahim grows dangerous, my Sultan. His loyalty shifts from you to your son. He builds his own faction. He dreams of power beyond his station. The words found fertile ground in Suleiman's increasingly troubled mind. Years of absolute rule had bred a terrible loneliness. Even Ibrahim seemed distant now, consumed with matters of state. When had their friendship become formal audience? When had easy laughter become careful protocol? Doubt crystallized into certainty through Hurrem's patient cultivation. She presented evidence both real and imagined, letters interpreted as treachery, conversations twisted into conspiracy. Ibrahim's very devotion to Mustafa became proof of his betrayal. The execution order arrived at dawn. No trial, no explanation, simply the silk cord and the swift, efficient work of the palace executioners. Ibrahim Pasha died as he had lived, in service to the empire. His final breath carried no protest, no curse, only the quiet dignity of a man who understood too late that friendship cannot survive the acid touch of absolute power. News of the Grand Vizier's death spread through Constantinople like wildfire through dry grass. If Ibrahim Pasha could fall, no one was safe. The palace trembled. Courtiers burned letters and avoided eye contact. The great machine of empire continued its relentless turning, but now lubricated with fear instead of trust. Hurrem watched from her garden pavilion as servants carried away the last possessions of the empire's greatest minister. Another obstacle removed, another path cleared toward her children's future. The game continued. Only the pieces had changed. The order arrived on parchment sealed with the imperial tughra. Eregli. Come at once. The Sultan's hand had traced these words with calculated precision, each letter a thread in a web 20 years in the making. Mustafa read the summons in the pale light of dawn. His fingers traced the familiar seal. His father called, and he would answer. He had always answered. The camp stirred to life around him. Soldiers emerged from their tents, breath visible in the crisp October air. They moved with the quiet efficiency of men who had followed this prince through countless campaigns, who had seen him bleed alongside them in the muddy trenches of Baghdad and Belgrade. Word spread swiftly through the ranks. The prince would ride to meet the Sultan. They would accompany him, as they always had. Their loyalty was not a choice, but a conviction burned into their souls through shared hardship and victory. Mustafa mounted his horse as the sun crested the horizon. Behind him, 10,000 men prepared to follow. Their armor caught the morning light, a river of steel flowing across the Anatolian plain. The ground trembled beneath their collective weight. In the imperial camp at Eregli, different preparations unfolded. Hurrem's letters had arrived months before, each one more urgent than the last. The janissary corps waited in formation, their white caps pristine, their silence absolute. They had received their orders. They understood their duty. The Sultan sat in his pavilion, surrounded by the trappings of empire. Golden vessels lined the walls. Persian carpets covered the ground. Yet the magnificence felt hollow, like a tomb decorated for the living. His fingers drummed against the arm of his throne, the only sign of the storm raging within. Roxolana's voice echoed in his memory. He grows too powerful. The soldiers love him too much. He will tear the empire apart. Her words had fallen like poison into the well of his fears, contaminating every thought of his eldest son. The road between father and son stretched across 60 miles of dusty plain. Each mile carried the weight of 2 decades. Each step forward marked another moment lost, Another bridge burned in the fire of ambition and suspicion. Villagers emerged from their homes to watch Mustafa's procession pass. They threw rose petals in his path and called out blessings. Children ran alongside his horse, their faces bright with wonder. Old women wept openly, though they could not say why. The prince acknowledged their devotion with gentle nods, his face serene despite the growing weight in his chest. He had felt this feeling before, in the moments before battle, when death walked close enough to touch. Yet this time was different. This time, the enemy wore his father's face. The sun climbed higher, casting sharp shadows across the landscape. Two armies moved toward convergence, father and son drawn together by forces neither could escape. History held its breath, waiting to witness the collision of love and power, of blood and ambition. The empire trembled on the edge of tragedy, balanced on the knife's edge between dynasty and destruction. The silk cord gleamed in the lamplight like spun gold. It lay coiled upon the small table beside the campaign chair, waiting. The deaf-mute executioners stood motionless as carved stone, their faces empty of expression, their hands steady. Behind the carved wooden screen, Suleiman sat in shadow. His breathing came shallow and quick. The weight of empire pressed upon his shoulders like chainmail forged from the bones of his ancestors. Prince Mustafa entered the tent with measured steps. His boots whispered against the Persian carpets. No guards accompanied him. He had dismissed them at the threshold with a gentle word, as was his custom. Trust flowed through, his veins like mother's milk. The canvas walls rippled in the evening wind. Outside, the janissaries tended their fires and sharpened their blades, unaware that history pivoted upon this single breath. Mustafa's eyes found the silent figures waiting in the golden light. Understanding dawned across his features like sunrise over the Bosphorus. His hand did not move toward his sword. His voice did not call for help. The golden prince simply stood, straight as a cypress, and faced his fate. The executioners moved with practiced grace. Their hands were gentle, almost tender. The silk cord whispered as it tightened. Mustafa's eyes remained open, fixed upon some distant horizon visible only to him. His lips formed no curse, no plea, no final declaration of love or loyalty. Behind the screen, a father's heart shattered like crystal upon marble. The prince's body settled to the carpet with the soft finality of fallen leaves. His face held the same noble bearing that had marked his birth, his victories, his dreams of ruling justly. Death could not diminish the quiet dignity that had made soldiers weep and poets sing. The deed was finished. The executioners withdrew like phantoms into the night. The tent fell silent, save for the whisper of wind through canvas and the distant murmur of an army that would soon learn its beloved prince was gone. Suleiman emerged from behind the screen. His legs trembled as he approached his son's still form. The boy who had once ridden upon his shoulders, the prince who had conquered cities in his name, the heir who would never sit upon the throne of thrones. Word spread through the camp like plague through narrow streets. Soldiers wept openly. Officers stared in disbelief. Distant provinces stirred with whispers of rebellion. The empire itself seemed to shudder, as if its very foundations had shifted beneath the weight of innocent blood. In the capital, poets would struggle to find words for this darkness. Historians would debate the necessity, the wisdom, the terrible price of imperial survival. But in this moment, in this tent suffused with the scent of sandalwood and death, There existed only the silence of a father who had murdered hope itself. The silk cord lay discarded upon the carpet. It caught the lamplight still, gleaming like tears upon a sultan's cheek. The news spreads like wildfire through the camp. Mustafa is dead. The beloved prince lies cold in his tent, while his father's hands still shake from the deed. The janissaries hear first. These elite soldiers who have served 3 sultans drop their weapons. Some weep openly. Others stand in stunned silence, their loyalty cracking like ice under spring's sun. Commander Ibrahim Pasha tries to restore order. His voice echoes across the ranks, but his words fall on deaf ears. The men who once marched in perfect formation now mill about like lost children. They have served the house of Osman with their blood. They have conquered lands from Vienna to Baghdad, but this they cannot stomach. A captain steps forward. His face bears scars from a dozen campaigns. He tears the Sultan's insignia from his uniform and throws it to the ground. Others follow. The mutiny spreads through the camp like plague through a crowded city. Suleiman emerges from his tent to find chaos. His own guard wavers. The janissary commander approaches with drawn sword, not to protect, but to accuse. The man who has defended the empire now stands ready to strike down its ruler. The Sultan acts swiftly. Ibrahim Pasha falls before he can speak his condemnation. Blood pools in the dust where loyalty once flourished. But even this execution cannot stem the tide of rebellion. Suleiman must flee his own army, escaping under cover of darkness like a common criminal. Word travels faster than horses across the empire. In Istanbul, the poets begin their laments. Verses flow from their pens like tears from a mother's eyes. They sing of Mustafa's courage, his justice, his promise cut short. The coffeehouses echo with their mourning songs. The historians note this moment with heavy hearts. They mark their chronicles carefully, knowing future generations will ask when the empire began its long decline. Some will point to military defeats, others to economic troubles. But the wise ones will trace it to this night when a father destroyed his finest son. In the palace, Hurrem receives the news of victory. The rival who threatened her children's future lies dead. Her gamble has succeeded. Yet no joy touches her heart. She walks through chambers that feel suddenly cold. The servants avert their eyes. Even her most devoted allies speak in whispers. The empire she sought to secure now regards her with revulsion. Mothers curse her name when they kiss their children good night. Soldiers spit at her mention. The people loved Mustafa with a devotion that transcends death. In killing him, she has murdered something precious in their hearts. Hurrem stands at her window overlooking the Bosphorus. Ships pass below, carrying merchants and pilgrims who speak her name like a plague upon the land. She has won everything and lost what matters most. The crown she preserved for her son now sits upon a throne built on hatred. The empire weeps for its lost prince. And in that collective sorrow lies the seed of its own destruction. The final years came swiftly, like autumn leaves surrendering to inevitable winds. Hurrem felt death approaching in the palace corridors where she had once walked with such fierce purpose. Her body, weakened by decades of calculated survival, began its quiet rebellion. The hands that had penned countless letters of political maneuvering trembled now as she reached for water. The eyes that had gazed into Suleiman's soul with such penetrating intensity grew dim. She died in the spring of 1558, 2 years after Mustafa's blood had crystallized into the crown Prince Selim would inherit. Her final breath escaped in the same chambers where, She had plotted the destruction of her stepson. The irony was not lost on those who whispered in the palace shadows. Love had elevated her from slave to sultana. Love had demanded she destroy an innocent prince. Love had consumed her completely. Peace eluded her even in death. Suleiman received word of her passing while reviewing military dispatches from the Hungarian front. The parchment slipped from his fingers. For long moments he sat motionless, as if the weight of 10 years of grief had finally settled fully upon his shoulders. The empire continued its relentless machinery of conquest and administration. But something fundamental had shifted in the Sultan's spirit. He aged visibly after Hurrem's death. The man who had once stridden across battlefields with leonine confidence now moved with the careful steps of someone carrying invisible wounds. His sons began their predictable dance of destruction almost immediately. Selim and Bayezid, products of their mother's ambition and their father's haunted choices, turned on each other with venomous intensity. The succession wars Hurrem had orchestrated through her manipulation of the Mustafa crisis now consumed her own blood. Brother fought brother. The empire bled from within, while enemies gathered at its borders. Suleiman watched his remaining sons tear at each other like wolves. He had killed his worthiest heir to preserve the dynasty. Now that dynasty devoured itself with mechanical precision. Every skirmish between Selim and Bayezid echoed with Mustafa's ghost. The Sultan who had conquered Rhodes and Belgrade, who had stood at the gates of Vienna, found himself powerless against the forces his love had unleashed. Military genius meant nothing when the enemy was his own legacy. He died in 1566 during the siege of Sigetvar, far from Constantinople, surrounded by the mud and blood of yet another campaign. His final years had been spent trying to hold together what passion had torn apart. History would remember Suleiman as the magnificent, the lawgiver, the shadow of God on earth. But in his last moments, witnesses claimed he whispered names that belonged to the dead. Hurrem, Mustafa, the two souls whose collision had defined his reign and destroyed his peace. The greatest sultan of the Ottoman Empire died, knowing that empires built through conquest could endure centuries of warfare. But love, when it demanded blood, could unravel kingdoms in a single generation. His heart had chosen. His dynasty paid the price.